Coming up, the government's advisory group, SAGE, says that Dido Harding's £37 billion failed test and trace system had minimal impact on the transmission of the coronavirus. Harding's response was that people's expectations were far too high, despite the system costing £542 for every man, woman and child in the UK. Now it's looking likely she'll be the next head of NHS England. Keep watching. Dame Dido Harding, Tory peer, catastrophically bad former CEO of TalkTalk, and until recently in charge of the much maligned test and trace system, has now applied to become the chief executive of the National Health Service, Europe's biggest employer. According to the Sunday Times, she said she wants to end the NHS's reliance on foreigners and has also warned against demonising private healthcare. But these aren't the only reasons her appointment would be controversial. A recent report laid the blame squarely on Harding's test and trace system for a surge in the Indian variant of coronavirus. So not only wasn't it fit for purpose, namely preventing a second and third wave, but in fact the only impact it's had on the pandemic is a negative one. And a report by the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee said the programme used up unimaginable amounts of taxpayers' money for no discernible benefits whatsoever. Dido Harding's primal pro-business instinct meant she overlooked experienced local public health tracers and instead gave huge contracts to Tory associates and donors like Randox, Deloitte's, Boston Consulting Group and Serco, with consultants paid up to nearly £7,000 a day. Basically, it's a multi-billion pound industry of Tory corruption. £37 billion. I mean, you can hardly grasp the concept of how large a sum of money that is that she's wasted. Gordon Brown recently said it would cost £22 billion to vaccinate the entire world. Not much more than half the amount Harding spaffed on the failed test and trace system alone. £37 billion is more than the entire Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government annual budget. To raise NHS pay by 5% instead of the miserable 1% on offer would only cost £1.7 billion by contrast. Dido Harding spaffed £37 billion could have funded a 10% rise for all NHS staff for 10 years. Is this really the person we want in charge of our NHS? If successful, Harding will be responsible for delivering England's whole pandemic strategy and clearing an NHS waiting list of almost 5 million. I can hear our Scottish friends laughing at that. The selection process is overseen by the NHS England board, and although Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, has a veto, it was Hancock who appointed her to run Test and Trace last year, so that isn't likely to be a barrier to her. When Harding was appointed to Test and Trace, without competition by the way, she was best known for being the chief executive of TalkTalk when it was fined £400,000 by the government for a massive personal data breach in 2015. Harding, by the way, was an Oxford University friend of David Cameron, and it was him that gave her a peerage. She's also married to a Tory MP, and she sits on the board of the Jockey Club in Matt Hancock's Newmarket constituency, and the pair often go riding together. Horse owners and trainers are generous donors to Hancock, and Dido Harding's husband is the Tory so-called corruption czar, John Penrose. What a joke. So she seems to tick all the cronyism boxes. Kate Bingham, another wife of a Tory MP nepotistically appointed to run the vaccine programme, has by contrast been stunningly successful by using the NHS, not contractors, for the vaccine programme. Although, of course, whatever the outcome, cronyism is inherently corrupt. But this example contrasts with Dido Harding's complete failure. As a Cameron-appointed Tory peer in the House of Lords, Dido Harding has never once voted against the government, so not only is she a crony, but she's a compliant crony too. She's a failed executive from the business world with absolutely no experience of the NHS, but she was made chair of NHS Improvement without contest, which involved overseeing every NHS trust, before being appointed head of Test and Trace, again without contest, which has been described as possibly the most notorious public administration disaster in living memory. The current NHS England chief, Simon Stevens, has been a powerful defender of the NHS against government interference and creeping privatisation. With the gradual defunding of NHS services over 11 years of Tory austerity, the institution is now in crisis, with epic waiting lists and workforce shortages. And it gets worse. The upcoming Health and Care Bill abolishes the NHS chief's independence, giving the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, ultimate powers, including a veto over NHS appointments. The minister can therefore make sure that compliant allies run the new integrated care systems controlling local services and all NHS trust boards. That will require a yes man, or yes woman, as chief executive. Can you see why Dido Harding is favourite for the role? Look, her appointment would be an outrage, but the common theme of these videos is why aren't more people outraged? The vast majority of the UK electorate just couldn't seem to care less. Corruption barely raises voters' eyebrows anymore as we move towards the American model of political affiliation trumping honesty. What James O'Brien refers to as the footballification of politics, the "it's my team so it must be good" mentality. These Boris Johnson fanboys and girls, these pro-government scarf-waving nationalistic song-singing masses, even when the industrial scale corruption gets brought to their attention, their response is, so what? All the watchdogs, the oversight committees, the ombudsman, and even the National Audit Office report these scandals, of which Test and Trace is only one of myriad examples. But they seem to have no more power to do anything about it than me. And even if they did, what chance is there for any consequences for these corrupt members of the current kleptocracy in power? Those so-called independent boards overseeing departments are made up of a majority of Tory special advisors and allies, just to make doubly sure that ministers and their cronies are never held to account. I guess there's nothing for it but to start learning the words of their new song for indoctrinating our schoolchildren. One Britain, one nation? I don't think so.